Hello everybody, this is Hank. Today I'm back. We are going to talk about shutter speed in photography, so let's get into it. Okay, shutter speed is one of the three components to determine a correct exposure. And we often refer to these three as the exposure triangle. We have aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. I already have a video to talk in detail about aperture. So today I'm doing the shutter speed, and later I'll do the ISO. The ISO is a lot more simple. But anyway, so the three factors, shutter speed is one of very important one as well. So we are going to discuss that in detail. All right, so what is shutter speed? Shutter speed is basically the duration that the camera lets the light in, okay, through the lens into the sensor. All right. So before we go any further on it, I like to show you a quick video I made to show the shutter operation. I use a older film camera because I don't want to show the modern camera that has a sensor that dirt might get into it when it's open. So I'm using a film camera. It's safe. There's no sensor to worry about. So let's watch that really quick. So basically, what we have here is like the first one was at 1/1000 of a second, very fast. The shutter opened so fast, you could barely see it. So now this next one is 1/25 of a second. So you can see it open barely, still pretty fast. The next one would be 1/4 of a second, a lot slower. You can see shutter open fully, then close. The next one will be 2 seconds, and then you definitely can see that it opened for a long time. The last one is what I call the bulb mode, and it remains open as long as you press the shutter. But so it could be 20 seconds if you want, 30 if you want, 40 if you want, right? So basically, that's the shutter opens it up wide for how long, right? That you get to set, and the duration dictates how much light gets in. Okay, the longer the duration, the more light is going to get in. Uh, less light. Basically, very simple concept. Okay, the film camera that I had there only allows me to do 1/1000 of a second down to 2 seconds, and then the bulb mode. Now, modern cameras allows you to do from 1/8000 of a second down to 30 seconds, and then the bulb mode is going to allow you to do more than 30 seconds. All right. As we discussed, longer duration allow more light. Okay. Lesser duration allow less light. In that case, you have to worry about open up the aperture more so that more light will be able to get in, and or increase the ISO value, which is the sensitivity to light from the sensor's sensitivity to light. Okay, so basically, when you increase the ISO, you tell the sensor that, hey, increase the amount of light, the sensitivity to light. So make the picture brighter because of that. All right. So the last bullet is kind of important when you're hand holding. So when you're hand holding, right, and you tend to shake a little bit. Everybody shake, right? I shake a lot, but most people shake. And the most common rule of thumb is like, in order for you to make sure that the picture is not blurred due to the hand shaking, you got to set the shutter speed, minimum safe shutter speed, to 1 over the focal length. That's only applicable to 35mm film or full frame digital cameras. Okay. So for example, if I have a 50 millimeter lens, then my minimum safe shutter speed when hand holding would be 1/50. Now, if you have a crop sensor magnifies everything by 1.5 times for Sony and Nikon. For Canon, it magnifies 1.6 times. When it get magnified like that, it's easier to get more blurred because of magnification factor. So instead of 1/focal length, you do 1/focal length multiplied by the crop factor, the magnification factor, which is 1.5 or 1.6. So in this example, it would be 1/80 instead of 1/50. Okay, for crop sensor. All right. So next slide. Okay, here's a series of picture taken of exactly the same ceiling fan with different shutter speeds. And before I talked about these, I want to show you the video to show you the speed of the fan, right? Because the fan is spinning. Okay, so we got a pretty high speed setting, and it's spinning pretty fast. So that's what you're looking at. So I took a series of pictures with different shutter speed. Okay, we're gonna go backward from 1/30 of a second. Okay, you have a lot of motion blur because the fan is turning very fast. Now, as you increase every single f-stop, this thing is getting clearer and clearer because of the freezing motion property of the high shutter speed. Okay, so when you get to 1/1000, it looks almost as if the fan's not moving at all because most of the motion is captured, except that on the outer edges, because that is where the velocity is the highest and it's still a little blurred. You go to 1/2000, it's completely frozen. But if you look carefully at 1/4000, it's a lot sharper than even at 1/2000. So the higher the shutter speed, the sharper your image is. Keep that in mind. So when you have enough light, increase the shutter speed. It does not hurt. Unless you want a special effect using a slow shutter speed, that's a different story. But if you don't care about shutter speed, the higher the better, right? Even when you're on a tripod, because tripod is not completely motionless. It still moves a little bit, not much, but okay. Okay, here are a series of examples. Show you. Okay, so you use shutter priority to set the fast shutter speed. In this example, right, at a couple of years back at a surfing tournament, I took this picture, and the lady was surfing. I think this is Caroline Marks, and I set the speed to be 1/1600 of a second, and it was able to freeze the motion pretty well. All right. So the next example would be something similar. In this case, is two fast-moving jets, right, Thunderbirds. And because I know that they are coming at each other pretty fast, so I set the shutter speed to 1/2500 of a second. So I was able to capture this this action pretty well. All right. Okay, here's a landscape picture, but you notice like I used 30-second exposure. And the reason that I did that is because while you look at this picture, you may think that there's nothing moving, right? But in reality, the water surface was moving. There was some chop due to wind. So the surface was not glassy smooth like you see here. That's the effect of the slow shutter speed does for you. Okay, so anything that's moving not constantly, so is moving erratically, is going to disappear. When you have a slow shutter speed, such as from 1 second up to 30 seconds, everything's going to be blurred out and disappeared. Even moving objects are gone. Okay, people walking by are gone when you have something like 30 seconds. So keep that in mind. That's just one of the special property of slow shutter speed. Similarly, when you have moving water, for example, something moving, and you want to convey the motion, right? So you use a slow shutter speed. Okay, in this example, as you notice, like my ISO is down to 50. The reason for that is because I had too much light. So I couldn't get the speed to be any lower. So what I did was like increase the aperture to f16, which is the highest I'm willing to go without getting the picture to be blurry due to diffraction. Okay, ISO 50, so I gain 1 f-stop. So instead of 0.5 of a second, I get 1 second. And then I also use something we call an ND filter, which is the neutral density filter, to darken the light so that you can have a longer shutter speed. Okay, so in this example, 1 second is what I wanted. It gives me the motion that I'm looking for. So that's how I got that picture. Okay, here is, you can use slow speed exposure to do all kinds of special effects. Right? There's an interesting story with this. Originally, I took this picture with the meaning of long exposure to expose the streak of light, right? Red tail lights and white headlights coming at you, while the building were completely in focus and very clear. Now, what happened here? This was by accident, but now it became one of my repertoire, one of my technique. Is that so I had the camera on a tripod, and I set 5 seconds to get the exposure. Around 4 seconds, some kids are walking by, and they were kiddingly, but they were charging my camera, and I wasn't taking any chance. So around just about 4.5 seconds, I'm almost done with it, and the kids are getting too close. So I grabbed the tripod and I moved the tripod because I didn't want the kids to knock my expensive camera down. And so I ended up with this picture. It turned out to be very interesting. So it became one of my techniques, that if you want to have some special effect, move your tripod a little bit and hope for the best. But as a result of this chaotic light stream everywhere, the Eiffel Tower and the hot air balloon is moving. So that's just pretty neat. I thought that was a very interesting effect. It was caused by pure accident. All right. Here's an example, not a very good example, of light painting. So you can set a long exposure with the use of some lighted source, in this case a flashlight. I was able to draw something. And the exposure is about 30 seconds in a very dark room. And as you can see that, you could barely see me. You could see a faint outline of me behind the P and the S. But I literally disappeared. As I said, with a low shutter speed, moving things disappear. That is one of the very interesting property for slow shutter speed. Okay, here's another effect, right? Again, the use of slow shutter speed. For example, when you take a picture of a fast-moving jet like this, the normal thing to do is to set the shutter speed to be really high. In this example, 1/2000 capture. But then there's another technique called panning. So instead of using 1/2000, you use something much slower in terms of shutter speed. Okay, so in this example, I use 1/200 of a second at 400 millimeter, right? So that 1 over focal length thing, should dictate at least 1/400, right? So we do it a slower speed on purpose. And then you pan to match the camera movement perfectly with the movement of the subject. And that way, to the camera, the subject is not moving at all, therefore it's not blurry. The background, in contrast, is moving very quickly because the camera is moving, right? So the end result is, like, if you do it right, the background is completely blurred. Now, I have a separate video. I'm going to try to put a link in, and so that you can watch the technique. The video show the technique on how to do panning. Okay, so that's another effect. So shutter speed is kind of important. It gives you totally different looks in different pictures depending on what you want to do. I didn't tell you everything that could be done because I couldn't find sample pictures and I didn't want to use other people's pictures. I got to catalog my pictures better so I can find them, but so over the years it's just too many. But anyway, you get the idea. Okay, with that, I have 2 more slides, but you can stop here if you want to. I'm going to discuss a little bit more in detail on the concept of using TVS mode versus manual mode, and when to use it, and what's the pros and cons for each of it. So if you're interested in that, bear with me for another 5-10 minutes. If not, thank you very much and have a good one. Remember to like and subscribe. Thank you. Okay, so let's get into it. When do you use TVS mode? Obviously, when you want to control the shutter speed value, right? And you control the shutter speed value to do what? To control the motion. Either you blur the picture or you make the picture sharp. Especially when things are moving around. Okay? And when you're using TVS mode, you better not care about aperture value at all. Because why? Because the camera is taking care of setting an aperture for you. You have no control. Okay? So you better not care about it. If you care about it, you got to use M mode for it. And I will talk about it on the next slide. Okay? With anything else, ISO being one of the 3 factors, you got to worry about ISO. So you have a choice of setting auto ISO, so the camera is going to take care of it as well, or you set it to manual. You set it to manual and then you have to kind of watch out for it. Because this is a semi-automatic mode, because the camera is taking care of the aperture for you and or ISO if you choose auto ISO, then you are not in control of the exposure at all. The camera is. Okay, and if the camera metering system is fooled by reading it wrong, then you have the responsibility to correct for it. And there's like at least 2 methods to correct for it. The most popular method would be exposure compensation, right? And some people don't use exposure compensation. I use it all the time. I cannot do without it. Then you need to be using something like spot metering. so that you can spot metering in the area that you want the exposure to be correct. All right. So you have to worry about that. Now, TVS mode is most commonly used for action shooting, of course. Okay, so you increase or decrease the shutter speed to control that. Okay. All right, so when to use M mode? We talked a little bit about scenario, where you want to control the depth of field as well as the shutter speed. There are scenarios that you need both. Okay, so if you have a scenario that you need both, then you are better off using manual mode. And if you are not fast enough or whatever reason, then you can always use auto ISO so that the mode is still automatic, yet you have full control of both aperture and shutter speed. So that's my favorite mode, is M mode, because I can use either manual ISO when I have time, or when I don't have time, meaning when I'm taking action shots of moving birds, moving cars, moving airplanes. I set it to auto ISO so I don't have to worry about the whole exposure triangle. But I still have fundamental control of both my aperture and my speed. Right? Like anything else, you got to pay attention to the ISO, especially if you do manual ISO. There's a little catch. Using the M mode with auto ISO is that not all cameras will allow you to do exposure compensation in M mode. Okay, so when you're using auto ISO, again, you lose the control of the exposure. You have control of the aperture and the shutter speed, but you don't have control of the exposure because of ISO. And if the camera reads it wrong, then you need to help it with either exposure compensation, as we discussed in the previous slide, or metering. And many of the cameras do not let you do exposure compensation, only spot metering in M mode. Luckily, all of my cameras give me that option, so I don't really have a problem. I use exposure compensation quite a bit because my favorite style of shooting is against the sun. So my subjects are always dark. So I have to manually expose it. Either that or fill it in with a flash. So I do that a whole lot, almost every picture. And so when I buy a camera, I got to make sure I have exposure compensation in M mode. All right, with that, I thank you very much. We conclude the talk here. I hope that it was of some use to you. If you like it, please press the like button. If you haven't subscribed, I really, really appreciate a subscription from you. Thank you so much. Have a good one.